Hare Krishna, Vanchakalpatrubhyascha Kripasindhubhyeva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So welcome to our quarantined reading of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We're on chapter 4 of the Krishna book, which is titled Kamsa Begins His Persecutions. But first, in the introduction, Prabhupada has put this song at the beginning of the introduction. This is from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And this is what Krishna sang as he was leaving his birthplace and Mayapur for Jagannath Puri, taking sannyas. On the road, he sang this song. Somewhere, I believe, Prabhupada said this is another way of chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. So I'm going to just go through it once, just to set the mood, and then we'll begin reading from chapter 4 of Krishna book. Krishna, 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 Hare. Krishna, 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 Hare. Krishna, 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 Raksha Mam. Krishna, 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 Pahi Mam. Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Raksha Mam. Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Pahi Mam. Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Chapter 4, Kamsa begins his persecutions. After Vasudeva adjusted things as they had been before he carried Krishna to Gokula, and all the doors and gates became similarly closed, the gatekeepers awoke and heard the newborn child crying. Kamsa was waiting to hear the news of the child's birth, and the gatekeepers immediately approached him and informed him that the child was born. At that time, Kamsa got up from his bed very quickly and exclaimed, "Now the cruel death of my life is born." Kamsa became perplexed now that his death was approaching, and his hair scattered. Immediately, he proceeded toward the place where the child was born. Devaki, on seeing her brother approaching, prayed in a very meek attitude to Kamsa, "My dear brother, please do not kill this female child. I promise that this child will be the wife of your son. Therefore, don't kill her. You are not to be killed by any female child. The omen was that you are to be killed by a male child. So, please do not kill her. My dear brother, you have killed so many of my children who were just born, shining like the sun. That's not your fault. You have been advised by demoniac friends to kill my children. But now I beg you to excuse this girl at least. Let her live as my daughter." Kamsa was so cruel that he did not listen to the pitiful prayers of his sister Devaki. He forcibly grabbed the newborn child to rebuke his sister and attempted to dash her on a stone. mercilessly. This is a graphic example of a cruel demon who could sacrifice all relationships for the sake of personal gratification. But the child immediately slipped out of his hands, went up into the sky, and appeared with 8 arms as the younger sister of Vishnu. She was decorated with nice garments. She was decorated with nice garments and flower garlands and ornaments. In her 8 hands she held a bow, lance, arrows, sword, conch shell, disc, club, and shield. Seeing the appearance of the child, who was actually the goddess Durga, all the demigods from different planets like Siddhaloka, Charnaloka, Gandharva Loka, Apsara Loka, Kinnara Loka, and Uraga Loka presented her with various articles and began to offer their respective prayers. From above, the goddess addressed Kamsa, "You rascal, how can you kill me? The child who will kill you is already born before me, somewhere within this world. Don't be so cruel to your poor sister." After this appearance, Goddess Durga became known by various names in various parts of the world. After hearing these words, Kamsa became very much overwhelmed with fear. Out of pity, he immediately released Vasudeva and Devaki from the bondage of their shackles and very politely began to address them. He said, "My dear sister and brother-in-law, I have acted just like a demon in killing my own nephews, your children, and thereby I have given up all consideration of our intimate relationship. I do not know what will be the result of this envious act, these envious acts of mine. Probably I shall be sent to the hell where killers of brahmanas go. I am surprised, however, that the celestial denizens, the celestial prophecy has not come true. It is not only in human society that false propaganda is found. Now it appears that even the celestial denizens speak lies. Because I believed in the words of the celestial denizens, I have committed so many sins by killing the children of my sister." Remember, they prophesied a male child, so they lied, according to him. "My dear Vasudeva and Devaki, you are both very great souls. I have no instructions to give you, but I still request that you not be sorry for the death of your children. Every one of us is under the control of superior power, and that superior power does not allow us to remain together. We are bound to be separated from our friends and relatives in due course of time, but we must know for certain that even after the disappearance of the different material bodies, the soul remains intact eternally. For example, there are many pots made of earthly clay, and they are prepared and also broken. But in spite of this, the earth remains as it is perpetually. Similarly, the bodies of the souls under different conditions are made and destroyed, but the spirit soul remains eternally. So there's nothing to lament over. Everyone should understand that this material body is different from the spirit soul, and so long as one does not come to that understanding, he is sure to accept the processes of transmigration from one body to another. My dear sister Devaki, you are so gentle and kind. Please excuse me. Don't be aggrieved by the death of your children, which I have caused. Actually, this was not done by me, because all these are predestined activities. One has to act according to the predestined plan, even unwillingly. People misunderstand that with the end of the body, the self dies, or they think that one can kill another living entity. All these misconceptions oblige one to accept the conditions of material existence. In other words, as long as one is not firmly convinced of the eternality of the soul, one is subjected to the tribulation of being killer and killed. My dear sister Devaki and brother-in-law Vasudeva, kindly excuse the atrocities I have committed against you. I am very poor-hearted, and you are so great-hearted, so take compassion upon me and excuse me. While Kamsa was speaking to his brother-in-law and sister, tears flowed from his eyes, and he fell down at their feet. Believing the words of Durga Devi, whom he had tried to kill, Kamsa immediately released his brother-in-law and sister. He personally unlocked the iron shackles and very sympathetically showed his friendship for his family members. When Devaki saw her brother so repentant, she also became pacified and forgot all his atrocious activities against her children. Vasudeva also, forgetting all past incidents, spoke smilingly with his brother-in-law. Vasudeva told Kamsa, "My dear, fortunate brother-in-law, what you are saying about the material body and the soul is correct. Every living entity is born ignorant, misunderstanding this material body to be his self. This conception of life is due to ignorance, and on the basis of this ignorance, we create enmity or friendship, lamentation, jubilation, fearfulness, envy, greed, illusion, and madness are different features of our material concept of life. A person influenced like this engages in enmity only due to the material body. Being engaged in such activities, we forget our eternal relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Vasudeva took the opportunity of Kamsa's benevolence and informed him that his atheistic activities were also due to this misconception of life, namely, taking the material body to be the self. When Vasudeva talked with Kamsa in such an illuminating way, Kamsa became very pleased, and his guilt for killing his nephews subsided. With the permission of his sister Devaki and brother-in-law Vasudeva, he returned to his home with a relieved mind. As we shall see, this is short-lived. But the next day, Kamsa called all his counselors together and narrated to them all the incidents that had happened the night before. All the counselors of Kamsa were demons and eternal enemies of the demigods, so they became depressed upon hearing their master speak of the night's events. Although they were not very much experienced or learned, they began to give instructions to Kamsa as follows. Dear sir, let us now make arrangements to kill all the children who were born within the last 10 days in all towns, counties, villages, and pasturing grounds. Let us execute this plan indiscriminately. We think that the demigods cannot do anything against us if we perform these atrocities. They're always afraid of fighting with us. And even if they wish to check our activities, they will not dare to do so. Because of your immeasurable strength, they fear your bow. Indeed, we have practical experience that when you stood to fight with them and began to shower your arrows on them, they immediately fled in all directions just to save their lives. Many of the demigods were unable to fight with you, and they immediately surrendered themselves unto you by loosening their turbans and the tufts of hair on their heads. That's apparently a sign of surrender, where you take your turban off and let your hair get scattered. With folded hands, they begged you to spare them and said, "My Lord, we are all afraid of your strength. Please release us from this dangerous fight." We have also seen many times that you would never kill such surrendered fighters when they were all fearful, their bows, arrows, and chariots broken, forgetful of their military activities, and unable to fight with you. So actually, we have nothing to fear from these demigods. They're very proud of being great fighters in peacetime outside of the war field, but actually they cannot show any talent or military power on the war field. Although Lord Vishnu, Lord Shiva, and Lord Brahma are always ready to help the demigods, headed by Indra, we have no reason to be afraid of them. As far as Lord Vishnu is concerned, he has already hidden himself within the hearts of all living entities, and he cannot come out. As far as Lord Shiva is concerned, he has renounced all activities. He has already entered into the forest. And Lord Brahma is always engaged in different types of austerities and meditation. And what to speak of Indra? He's a straw in comparison to your strength. Therefore, we have nothing to fear from any of these demigods. But we must not neglect them, for the demigods are our determined enemies. We must be careful to protect ourselves. To root them out from their very existence, we should just engage ourselves in your service and be always ready for your command. You should think about this paragraph for a while. It's very interesting. But with the demon, anyway, they go on. The demons continue to say, if there is some disease in the body which is neglected, it worsens and becomes incurable. Similarly, when one is not careful about restraining the senses and lets them loose, then it is very difficult to control them. Therefore, we must now be very careful of the demigods before they get too strong to be subdued. The foundation of the strength of the demigods is Lord Vishnu, because all ultimate goals of religious principles because the ultimate goal of all religious principles is to satisfy him. The Vedic injunctions, the brahmanas, the cows, austerities, sacrifices, performance of charity, and distribution of wealth are all for the satisfaction of Lord Vishnu. So, let us immediately begin by killing all the brahmanas who are in charge of the Vedic knowledge, along with the great sages who are in charge of sacrificial, ritualistic performances. Let us kill all the cows, which are the source of butter, which is so necessary for performing sacrifices. Please give us your permission to kill all these creatures. Actually, the limbs of the transcendental body of Lord Vishnu are the Brahmanas, the cows, Vedic knowledge, austerity, truthfulness, sense and mind control, faithfulness, charity, tolerance, and the performance of sacrifices. Lord Vishnu is situated in everyone's heart and is the leader of all demigods, including Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma. Therefore, we think that to persecute the great sages and brahmanas is to kill Lord Vishnu. So he's not immediately accessible, but if they get the sages and the brahmanas, that will function that way. Thus being advised by his demoniac ministers, Kamsa, who was from the very beginning the greatest rascal, decided to persecute the Brahmanas and Vaishnavas, being entrapped by the shackles of all-devouring eternal time. He ordered the demons to harass all kinds of saintly persons, and then he entered his house. The adherents of Kamsa were all influenced by the mode of passion, as well as illusioned by the mode of ignorance, and their only business was to create enmity with saintly persons. Such activities can only reduce one's duration of life. The demons accelerated the process and invited their death as soon as possible. The result of persecuting saintly persons is not only untimely death. The act is so offensive that the perpetrator also gradually loses his beauty, his fame, and his religious principles, and thus his promotion to higher planets is checked. Driven by various kinds of mental concoctions, the demons diminish all kinds of auspiciousness. An offense at the lotus feet of the devotees and the brahmanas is a greater offense than that committed at the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. A civilization that commits such sinful activities generally loses all faith in the Supreme Lord, and such a godless civilization becomes the source of all calamities in human society. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport of the 4th chapter of Krishna. Kamsa begins his persecutions. So that ends that, and then next week, chapter 5, will recount the meeting of Nanda and Vasudeva.
If anybody has any comments or questions, go ahead and type them into the chat box there. We'll read them out loud and further this discussion about this chapter. And we just have a quick greeting from Adi Devi Dasi, who says, Hare Krishna Gurudev, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna.
This chapter, while we're just waiting for some other comments, this chapter always reminds me of the power of association, one way or the other. He just comes and he starts repenting and seeing the wrongs of his ways and really changes his mood, and then,
Yes, from one extreme to another, he's repentant and everything, and then turn him around.
Mm-hmm. Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu, he asks, you mentioned that this section was important. To root them out from their very existence, we should just engage ourselves in your service and be always ready for your command. That's the end quote. Can you please elaborate?
I forgot what I said about him.
A couple paragraphs earlier.
Where did it happen? Let me look at
Count up 1, 2,
Huh?
3, 4 paragraphs earlier, I believe.
4, 3. How far down?
From the bottom.
Oh, from the bottom up. Okay, let me go up. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, what was the question again?
You mentioned that this section was important. Quote, to root them out from their very existence, we should just engage ourselves in your service and be always ready for your command.
Well, just this idea that you can root them out from their very existence. I mean, to me, it's astonishing the ambition. When he's talking about the devas, he mentions not only the demigods that are headed by Indra, but also Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma, who are not, the guna avatars, among other things. So to me, it's amazing that basically what their idea to do to get revenge is to destroy creation. It's just extraordinary, to root them out from their very existence. That's so nihilistic. It's like people, when they become really angry and want to destroy things, don't like to stop. They like to keep going. They're in a rage about something. They destroy something. Their rage is still there. They do some more. Their rage is still there. They do some more. They find someone else to get mad at. So their rage, their anger, their passion always finds another object. I think it's just extraordinary how they're, and the fact that they're able to turn Vasudeva, to turn Kamsa around like that was kind of amazing. It must have been very persuasive.
Yeah. Kendra Prabhu comments, he says, hearing Kamsa's ministers' proposals always makes me angry, and the Bhagavatam doesn't talk about what they actually carried out. Reminds me of the Brahmanas during the reign of Hiranyakashipu. I sometimes wonder at the collateral casualties of some of the Lord's Leelas.
Yeah, maybe.
And Gaura Shakti Prabhu asks, do we ever know who these counselors who advise Kamsa are? Or are we just to know them as demons and eternal enemies of the demigods?
As far as I remember, these particular counselors are not named. It's a question of bad association. If you associate with saintly persons and pious people, that will come out. And if you don't want it to come out, or you associate with evil people, then the other thing will come out. So the principle is there as association. They were able to turn him around so fast and so thoroughly. And, yeah.
they weren't even educated, it said.
It says that it says they weren't very well educated. That's right. Sadamani, who's in the studio audience, points out that it says from the very beginning they weren't educated. That's right. I can't find it now, but they were demons, eternal enemies of the demigods. You know, there is a narration in the Bhagavatam that describes the universe as kind of an interplanetary battle between the devas, who running affairs and keep the universe in the order, and the demons who always want to take it over and use it for their own purposes. This is the real Star Wars. So there's really an interplanetary battle, and what happens is somewhere Prabhupada gives the example, or the example is there, that just as when you rub two sticks together, fire comes out. So when there's friction between the devas and the demons, Krishna comes out. And then he reinforces the godly, and he destroys the ungodly. That's what his mission statement is. Huh? Whenever there's a decline of religion and a rise of irreligion, at that time I come, I advent. Yada yada hi dharma shaglani bhavata. That statement is there. So this is one incident of it. So in one ways, where the demons, when they become very prominent, we can also, and their devotees at the same time, we can see that the Lord will come, or even send somebody very powerful as a representative to rectify things. So we should become the devotees and become very staunch devotees, and we will see that will bring reinforcements from Vaikuntha.
Gaura Shakti Prabhu says, thank you for your answer, Gurudev. It really does drive the point home about the power of association. And he also has a comment from your previous words about, says, it reminds me of the saying, cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Yeah, that's right.
Anything else? Oh, Akendra Prabhu, he writes, he says, there may be those who imagine that Democrats and Republicans are the contemporary earthly representatives of the Devas and Asuras.
Yes, they may think like that. I always like so much when one of my favorite incidences with Prabhupada in the New York airport, when all these reporters were there with their pencils. I may have mentioned this before. And because Prabhupada, used to have, when he arrived at an airport, we'd have a Vyasasana and do Guru Puja and tell all the press he was there. So when he came it was a New York airport, and so the reporter said to him, "Why have you come to the West?" And Prabhupada said, "I have come to give you a brain." And I saw all the pencils stop and everybody look up, and he says, and then he explained, your society is headless, and that like the social body, like the human body has head, arms, belly, and legs, and so your society is headless. There is no brain. And then a little later on, he said, actually, in your society, everyone is a Shudra, and there are a few Vaishyas, which is a pretty. So we're in tough times, And so our mission is to provide the brain. That's what I took it from, that we should become that brain. And the more we become qualified as the brain, the more that Krishna will give us power to act. But if we simply take the resources of the material world and use them for sense gratification, that's not the brain. So we have to insulate ourselves from the atmosphere and increase our own Krishna consciousness, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. Where's the brain? Where's the head?
Tulsi Priya comments, she said, so, an angry, self-absorbed, and insecure head of state surrounds himself with malicious and incompetent ministers who will stoop to harm children, animals, and the environment. Where have I heard of that before?
Yeah, there's a lot of that going around, actually, You'll find. You can't, yeah. So remember, there may be demons and there may be devotees, but between the friction between the two, Krishna comes out. Oh.
I appreciate your statement of remembering that, Prabhupada's instruction of needing a brain.
Yeah.
And in times like this, it can sometimes feel like, what can we do? And it seems like, okay, this is one thing we can do, even if we are in isolation or whatever, work on our own Krishna consciousness.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just to improve our own Krishna consciousness, and then Krishna will give us not only from within direction what to do, but also the power to do it. I'm convinced of this. And so it seems to me when the world is in such bad shape, it seems from material nature as well as human nature in so many ways. When you look at so many heads of state, they are, just like these people. It's really the best thing we can do is just really improve our own Krishna consciousness. And we have a simple practice of doing, of chanting the holy name. Before I was a devotee, and I was in graduate religious studies, I had one professor who said something that I remembered for a long time after that. He said, and this is before I met devotees, he said, the real question isn't whether God exists or not. The real question is God available? And I was impressed by that because I thought, if God exists and is not available, what difference does it make? And if God is available, then it answers the existence question. And I remembered that, and then shortly thereafter, I think I heard ching, 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 ching on our campus and saw devotees, and so, that's how God is available, simply in the form of sound. Remember, that is also the Hare Krishna mantra is also an avatar. That's how God is present among us, and really, it's up to us to take full advantage of that, not just for us, but for the whole Earth planet, and even maybe more than that, not just the humans, but everyone who's suffering at the hands of this horrible devastation caused by people's greed and selfishness. So it's good to keep that in mind. We can do something. Thank you.
And Tulsi Priya also comments, plus the sound vibration purifies the atmosphere, especially when spoken by pure devotees.
It's true. So let's become pure ourselves and help everybody. Okay, our coming attractions are next week. The meeting of Nanda and Vasudeva, chapter 5. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Krishna book ki jai.
Jai.